I know no more what I'm going to think next than what you're going to say next. You
And
can list all the facts you want, and oftentimes people who are not scientists don't understand why any of it matters, right? And can get lost pretty quickly. Not a matter of how smart they are, it's a matter of do they understand the context? And so stories are a great way of taking facts, but helping people understand why they matter and how it's valuable in a career for helping someone who's not an expert on what you do understand why it matters. So it's interesting thinking about for so long in human history, stories were the way things were recorded and transferred. And I've always wondered how much those stories might have evolved as they were told around the globe. It's a big place. I'm sure you've heard of the telephone game.
yeah.
I don't remember where I first heard of this. You set people in a circle and you whisper to one person a phrase, a sentence, and then they're supposed to whisper it to the person next to them and whisper because that produces just enough uncertainty. What you see is it travels around, and you can only say it once. I think that's the other thing, right? As it goes around the circle, when you get to the other side, usually the sentence is completely changed because somewhere along the line, usually many steps, something was missed. It was misunderstood, misinterpreted, whatever, and it carried on that way. Obviously, we have our own issues with truth now, but at least it is possible to record it and have that exist and have that persist. But I wonder how much stories evolved.
And what do they say? Like our experience right now, out in 10 years from now, I will have a totally different experience than you have. And we tell a totally different story. And this whole podcast was completely different, except for the data that we see online.
Yeah. It's funny. Here's how I think of that. So I graduated got my PhD, it's pushing 30 years ago now, actually. But I'm really close friends with a few of the other fellow students. There's, four of us guys that have stayed in touch and still see each other periodically. So we talk about things that were that long ago. And that gives you an interesting snapshot in how obviously details get lost. We only commit so much to our long-term memories, conversations, other things. We may capture the essence of the conversation, but somehow we heard it a little differently. We all have our own filters. That's a really interesting experiment.
How does physics see consciousness?
Ooh, boy. So I'm not aware that physics has any opinion on that per se. I mean, it's a great question. I've seen more discussions of consciousness lately than I suppose ever before. But I'll give you my own perspective having studied it. Certainly physics is kind of the base level science, right? You've got chemistry and biology that are just more complex levels of that. Well, physics, we study the very fundamental things, as fundamental as we can get. And of course, we're still pushing in that direction. One time we found atoms, and then we realized, oh, wait, there's protons and neutrons and electrons. And oh, wait, goes further, there's quarks. And now we're working beyond that. But, at this fundamental level, the interesting thing about physics is it's causal. It's not deterministic anymore because you have quantum mechanics, of course, but there is still cause and effect. And that is an interesting question. If you say, well, it's all cause and effect, what does that really mean for consciousness? I don't have an answer to that, but it does seem to suggest some kind of a causal framework. Most humans kind of imagine, we have our consciousness is just our what we are from moment to moment. Many of us imagine we have a free will that is capricious and not causal at all. Physics would seem to disagree with that if you ask me, but so I don't know that there's any real picture on that from physics, except that, oh, it seems as though there's a causal framework underlying all of this.
You mentioned physics doesn't see free will.
Yeah.
So, can you say more to that?
hmm I mean, that would be my opinion now. Maybe a physicist would disagree. Generally, in discussions of free will, so there are two ways that I think of people, when they say free will. I think one is that if I were to, like, say I make a decision, if I were to back up and somehow replay that, I would have the ability to make a different decision. That's one way, right? Whereas if there's a causal framework, well, that wouldn't really happen. That wouldn't really be possible. Somebody could say, well, quantum mechanics, there's randomness in that, so maybe it would be a different outcome. Right, but that's different than saying I somehow chose something different. The other element of free will usually is people have this feeling like they are the, there's this self that is the creator of their thoughts. Like, I think my thoughts. And this, I don't know what physics would say about that so much, but being a scientist and observing the way things happen, I think, I don't know, my experience when I'm calm and just sit and watch my thoughts, they just spring out of nowhere. I don't create them. I mean, saying that I created them would suggest I could tell you what I'm going to think next. I don't, I can't do that. That makes no more sense. I know no more what I'm going to think next than what you're going to say next. And so, that's not physics per se, but that's how I, as a scientist, approach that problem. It's like we have this idea that there's this free will. We feel that it's important, but when you look, it doesn't seem like it's really there. And I think that's an important element of what consciousness is.